Hi, everyone. I received a request to do a video on the subject of growth mindset. And so I want to talk today about that concept and particularly how individuals can apply this idea of growth mindset in order to achieve individual success and the outcomes that we want. So to give some background, basically, this idea of and term growth mindset basically became popular or really became something in the mainstream with the publication of a book by an education researcher named Carol Dweck. And she was interested primarily in applying different theories on mindset to try to figure out how to get better educational outcomes. And what her research basically led her to was this idea of people who have a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. And I'll read you a quote from Dweck that explains the difference as she sees it. So I'm quoting here: in a fixed mindset, students believe their basic abilities, their intelligence, their talents are just fixed traits. They have a certain amount and that's that. And then their goal becomes to look smart all the time and never look dumb. In a growth mindset, students understand that their talents and abilities can be developed through effort, good teaching, and persistence. They don't necessarily think everyone's the same or anyone can be Einstein, but they believe that anyone can get smarter if they work at it. So, basically what Dweck is saying here is that if you it's a good idea to develop a growth mindset, because then you believe that whatever educational outcome you're after is something that you can work at and become better at. But if you believe that your outcomes and your results are primarily the product of your own innate ability, she argues that that ends up creating a dynamic or a cycle where when you don't achieve what you want to, you become discouraged and you don't apply yourself to try to figuring out and fixing the situation. Now, one of the things that happened is after Carol Dweck published her book and her research on growth mindset, I mean, this concept just took off like wildfire, became extraordinarily popular. And it became popular particularly in two areas. One was where she intended it to be, in the realm of educational research and methodologies. And the reason why it became so popular in the educational realm was that it very much played to the aspirations of equity-minded education practitioners and so forth, who basically now thought that they had found a way to level educational outcomes between groups. So basically what the thinking went is, well, if we're seeing disparities between educational outcomes along the lines of gender or socioeconomic status or race or whatever, maybe the way we can unlock that and maybe the way we can dispute notions that this is inevitable is by teaching people to adopt a growth mindset, to believe in themselves and so forth. And that way we can level out the outcomes. And then the other area where this really took off, this idea of growth mindset, is in the realm of self-development, self-help, self-improvement. And again, it very much played to this idea in the self-help community that you can take responsibility for your own outcomes, that if you adopt a certain mindset, that can lead to greater success or purpose or whatever you want. And now, the interesting thing that happened is after this idea of growth mindset became popular, researchers began to really test it and try to replicate Dweck's findings and see if it actually applies. And one of the things that researchers found, even those who generally shared Dweck's intuitions about this sort of thing, is that her study basically proved to be very difficult, if not impossible, to actually replicate. And when you look at where people have tried to implement different learning models grounded in growth mindset, they've yielded very mixed results, but I think nothing of the sort that the more optimistic advocates of growth mindset really believed would be possible. So, I wanted to tackle the subject of growth mindset and how to apply it, because even though I think the studies and the academic literature on growth mindset paint a very mixed picture, in my own research that I've done on achievement and so forth, both in the self-help and self-development world, but also if you look at some of my writings in the realm of achievement, scientific performance, wealth creation, and so forth, and then also actually in the biographical realm, where I've been a ghostwriter and where I've talked to individuals to try to figure out and diagnose and see from their own perspective why they succeeded. I found that some variant of growth mindset, whether or not they've actually heard the concept, is ingrained in their thinking. And so I don't think that the concept is totally off base, even if its implementation of the educational realm has not yielded anything definitive. And what I want to argue today, and a theory that I want to posit, is that growth mindset can be a very important instrument, an important tool that you can use to get the outcomes you want in life, but they have to be combined with three other areas, and that's what I want to talk about today. So number one is self-confidence. And self-confidence may sound related to growth mindset, but I think it's very different. And the way that I'm talking about or describing self-confidence is having a certain baseline level of belief in your own ability and having a certain belief that you can affect an outcome that you want before you actually have evidence of it materializing. So in other words, if you set a goal that you want to become wealthy, or you want to become successful, or you want to become better at something, your ability to actually get to that outcome, I think, very much depends on first developing and cultivating a belief that you can achieve that goal even before you actually achieve it, and often even before you really see any clear evidence that you can get there. And having that baseline level of self-confidence, I would argue, is a prerequisite to actually implementing a growth mindset properly. Number two, I would argue, is a very mature, accurate, and accurate understanding of genetics and your own genetic baseline. And here, what I mean by that is you have to have a very objective, clear-eyed perspective on what your just baseline abilities can actually achieve. So, if you're if you don't have if you're just not tall enough to be in the NBA, it doesn't matter how much self-confidence you have. It doesn't matter what kind of a mindset you have. You're just not going to get there. So having an accurate understanding of your own genetic abilities and then applying it to a domain where you have any reasonable conception or chance of success, I think, is a prerequisite of implementing growth mindset properly. And I suspect that this is where educational researchers and practitioners have fallen short, that they're so allergic to applying insights about genetics and the cognitive realm that they're not looking seriously at factoring that in, especially in an education system which is very homogenous, very not individually tailored, and that expects people of very different abilities to do the same thing. And then the final thing that I would argue is being good or being skilled at prediction. Now, I talk about this a great deal in my ebook, which I link to here in the description. But prediction and forecasting is a very different, distinct, and finite skill from expertise or from a drive or determination or any of these other things. But basically, prediction is the ability to know how one input or one situation or one set of different factors is most likely to manifest and when. So what are the outcomes that are likely to result if you apply something or if you put in a certain effort, and then when will it materialize? And again, this is something that is it's not something that you just know. Obviously, some people are better at it than others, but it really is a skill set and something that you can learn with different ways of thinking, different methodologies. And I would argue that when you combine self-confidence, good predictive abilities, and a very clear understanding of your own genetic baseline, that's when you can then introduce and really make use of growth mindset, and where you can really say, okay, within this narrow domain where I have a genetic advantage, where I know which inputs will lead to which output, and where I've already done the inner work of believing that something's possible, then you can say, okay, I'm going to apply a growth mentality to this particular situation or this skill, which will then get me to a further goal. So let me try to illustrate this with a example that I know well, which would be law school admissions. If you're aiming for a top law school, if your goal is to become one of a couple hundred people in a applicant pool of many thousand people who get into a certain school, the reality is that if you don't believe at some level that you can be one of those small number of people who get in, it's going to be very hard for you to cultivate and develop the motivation, the persistence, the determination that it takes to grind day after day to get there. But then you have to think about, do you have the genetics? Do you have the baseline level of IQ? Do you have the analytic abilities? Do you have the work ethic? Do you have all the different factors that you need in order to actually be able to do that? Because the reality is, if you don't have an IQ, at some threshold, and we can debate what it is, you're just not going to get the LSAT score or the GPA that you need to get there. And then finally, predictive ability. So like once you know, okay, in order to be competitive in law school admissions, you have to get a certain score on your LSAT. You have to have a certain set of extracurriculars. You have to get certain letters of recommendation. What are the activities? What are the things you actually have to do that will get you closer to those measures, closer to that goal? What are the inputs that are actually, can you predict or foresee at some point down the line will get you to the outcome you deserve? And then when you have all these ingredients into place, then you can say, okay, my ability to get a good GPA is going to come down to being a good writer. Whether or not I'm a good writer, there are any number of things you can do to apply yourself and work at it to become a better writer. Or, if you want to be a better speaker, or you want to be a better analytical thinker, this isn't something that just comes from the womb. You have to work at it and apply a growth mindset and know that this is something that you can develop. Robert has a question here. Interesting, isn't that faith though? It's a good question. I actually do think that self-confidence to some degree requires faith. And I think that this is where, I know this is probably controversial among people who are very empirical or empiricists, or people who are addicted to scientific research and view the world through that lens. But I think that especially if you're trying to do something that is foreign or new or innovative, or you're trying to create something or become something that hasn't been manifested, I do think that you need a certain level of faith. And I think that obviously you can check that faith, you can check that confidence by looking at genetics, looking at information, looking at studies, and so forth. But I do think that a certain degree of faith is required to really be an outlier. And I think that that's why when you really look at the outer bounds of achievement, when you really look at people who are cutting edge innovators or creators or creatives, people who break records, they often they appear to be very unrealistic. They appear to be delusional. They appear, whatever they achieve in one domain, like they may have very weird, quirky theories in another respect. So like an example of this might be, you can see this in, of all places, Nobel Prize winners in the sciences, where you see these people and they just, they work and work and work. They're very logical, very analytical. They believe in the scientific method, and they discover some great thing in research and science. And then like you look at what they believe in politics, and they might be like some conspiracy crank or theorists or whatever. And you know, the reason they have like weird conspiracy theories is not in spite of the fact that they're brilliant scientists. It's because there's something in their faith or their confidence in themselves that can, you know, yield very important things in one respect, but then lead to totally kind of off base or quirky beliefs in another area. So anyway, that's all I have on growth mindset. Let me know what you think. Let me know if you have a different understanding or a different view, and I will talk to you soon.